Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. This is the launch of Cozy Up October. So all throughout October, I'll be sharing different ideas with you on how to use up that flannel and fleece that some of us may have in our stash. My brother gave me a huge tote of flannel, and to be quite honest, they're all different sizes and shapes and themes, and it's been sitting on my floor for a while, so I just decided, you know what, we're going to turn this into a series and maybe I can help someone else out as well. So today I've grabbed 3 different flannels from the tote, and we're going to be making a self-binding mitered cornered baby blanket. Now, there are definitely a lot of tutorials out there showing you how to do this, and if you need step-by-step instructions and stuff, I will give you links to a couple different blogs down below that you can go and check out. But I do encourage you to watch the video today because, as I said, I'm using up scraps. And that means I'm going to have to be a little creative before I can even get my pieces cut on how to get the sizes I need. So what I've done, let's head to the cutting table and I'll show you. I have 3 different fabrics, and thankfully this one is actually big enough to be the top of my blanket. And this one I'll be cutting down to 28 inches. Now that's a little different than what you may see on some blogs that I share below, but the reason is because I have 28 inches of this. And so I'm just gonna adjust other things, and it's just gonna be a little smaller. It's still gonna be fine for wrapping that little baby up. But the problem came in because the other matching flannels that I had that I wanted to use with this were not big enough. So what I've done is I've trimmed them down and I've trimmed off the edges straight, and I'm going to sew 3 pieces of flannel together so I get a big enough piece for the back of my blanket. So we're gonna head to the sewing machine to get these sewn together, and then we'll cut out our pieces, go back to the sewing machine to put our blanket together. I'm going to keep this rather simple, but the idea behind this that I wanted to share with you is that a lot of times we're doing some projects and then you have some leftover scraps, right? And a lot of times they're not big enough on their own to be something else, but maybe if you combine them, they're big enough to be what you need, right? So the pattern that I share in the description box below, it tells you the back of the blanket needs to be 40 inches, but my front fabric is only 28. So I'm gonna fudge a little bit and I'm gonna make it 28 and 38 instead of 30 and 40. So basically, I'm just going to be sewing these pieces together. Now, the thing is, here's the concept that I'm hoping to share that you might be inspired by. If you don't have a one piece of fabric that's big enough to make that back or the front of your blanket, then maybe you can piece some together. Now, like I said, I'm keeping this very simple, and I'm just going to do basically a striped look for the back of my blanket. But you could totally turn this into squares and do like a patchwork top or bottom for your blanket to get it to the right size. Now you do want to be careful and just try to make sure that you do just, keep your fabrics even and keep them going through your machine at the same rate so you don't get any puckers or anything. But I think this is going to be so cute once it's done. Just to have a little extra interest on the back of this blanket. Now, if you do want to go out and buy fabric specific to make this project, you are going to need about a yard. You're going to need 30 inches. So I would have them go ahead and cut a yard of one fabric and then a yard and a quarter of another. And again, I'm using flannel for this. It's not quilting cotton this time. It is a flannel fabric. I'm really excited about this series, you guys. I hope that you are too. I hope that you tune in for all the different projects that I have lined out for this month. There's going to be some really fun ones and some great gift ideas. The fabrics that I'm using, they may not be holiday themed all the time, but definitely you could turn these into Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, baby gifts, whatever. All right, so then the last thing I'm going to do before I cut this down, and I'm going to flip this over so the wrong side is up. I'm going to take this to my ironing board and I'm going to iron these seams to one side or the other, and then I'm going to run a little stitch just to make sure that seam stays nice and flat inside that blanket. All right, so I actually ended up pressing these seams open, not to one side, just because I want to be able to use a really wide zigzag stitch. So I'm going to crank this all the way up and I'm going to make it a little bit longer than normal. If you have a Juki DX7, I am using the zigzag stitch and I have it on 7 wide and 3 long. So if you wanted to do the exact same stitch, you can. Since we don't really add much quilting into this little self-binding blanket, it's just important to be able to make sure those seams stay flat, and that's why I'm doing this. Okay, now that we have our pieces big enough to cut, we're gonna go back to the cutting table and cut out our blanket pieces. All right, so like I said, one piece is gonna be 28 and the other one's gonna be 38. This is gonna be my 28-inch piece. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just lay it this way. And I'm going to lay a straight edge on 2 lines, one over here, knowing I start at 1, so I need to cut this at 15. I'll cut this at 15 because 1 minus 15 is 14, 14 times 14, or 14 plus 14 is 28. And then I'm gonna just go ahead and turn my mat. Make it easy on myself. And then when you're cutting things like this, when they're folded into quarters, you just want to make sure that you have one of the lines on your ruler straight on that edge and make sure it is straight on this edge too. And that way you know when you cut it, you won't have those little V's that you sometimes get if your fabric is off a little bit when you cut. All right, so this is our 28-inch piece. How cute is that? Now we need to cut our 38-inch piece, and that's going to be at 19 inches on the fold. Now my mat is only 18 by 24, so I'll have to turn this fabric. All right, so there's my first cut, and now I'll just turn this, lining up this edge on a straight edge over here. All right. That is a much smaller scrap than we started with, so that's good. But we're going to go ahead and put that in the pile and we'll be able to use that for something else. All right, so how do we put this together? Well, this is where it gets not difficult, but you got to think a little bit. And believe it or not, we're going to use some pens because we want to find both the center of this and that. So I'm going to go ahead and fold this. And I could have marked these before I unfolded it. That would have been something smart to do. So do that if you haven't unfolded your fabric yet. And then I'm just going to stick a pen right in these folds. Those two. And these two. So you're going to have 4 pins marking. You're basically marking the center of each side. Open this up, right sides together. And now this is when it gets kind of crazy, but I promise you it will work out. I'm just going to do this one side at a time. So I'm just going to mark my pen. And now I'm going to take this to that and pin these together right on the edge. Nothing different here. The difference is going to come in because remember, this is much smaller than that. And that's what makes our binding and our mitered corners. So you're going to just walk this out. And you can pin if you want more than just a few places. You can pin as much as you want along here. And you're going to stop 1/4 of an inch from this end and this end on every side. So let me get all these pinned together and I'll show you what we have. Okay, now that it's pinned, you can see that we have like these little bunny ears or whatever on the corners. They're just kind of hanging out there because we're gonna sew 1/4 of an inch in from both this side, and this is gonna be kind of loose. Then we'll come back and mark this, and that's gonna be our mitered corner. When we turn it out, it's gonna be our binding. So one of the sides of our blanket, don't forget to leave a little bit of an opening because you're going to do those mitered corners first. And then you're going to turn it out. If you don't leave an opening in one side of your blanket, you're not going to be able to turn it. All right, and I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. Now, when you get down here to the corner, just kind of tug your green fabric back and straight, and that way you can go ahead and sew this within 1/4 of an inch of the end. Okay, so now when I turn this corner and I start to go for the other side, I'm just going to line these up really well, get this under my needle, 1/4 of an inch in, put a couple stitches, and then I can go ahead and find my center point and get the rest of this side lined up so I can do my 1/4 inch seam. Now, does it have to be a 1/4 inch seam? No, I wouldn't go any less. But if you want to do a 1/2 inch seam, you could totally do that. But then you would be, your blanket would be a little smaller. And you want to make sure that you're stopping 1/2 of an inch from the corner, not 1/4 of an inch. So whatever your seam allowance is that you want to put into this, that's how far away from the corner you're going to stop. 1/4 inch is just kind of standard in the quilting world, I guess. If you do a lot of seamstress stuff, then you will know that that's a 5/8 inch most of the time when you're doing apparel sewing. Again, stopping 1/4 inch from the end because that's my seam allowance. And then again, just lining up the sides. This is a very forgiving pattern. If you're a little off or whatever on your seams, it's not going to matter that much. You want to be as straight as you can be, but don't sweat it if you're a little off. This is a great beginner sewing project as well. So if you have people around you that want to learn how to sew, this is a great one to start with. It's fairly simple, fairly quick. That was one thing I know when I was helping my stepdaughter learn how to sew. Quick projects, in any craft with kids especially. Quick projects are good because then they have something to show for their efforts in a short amount of time, and it helps encourage them to continue sewing or whatever the craft may be. And again, I'm just lining up the edges here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that pin, keeping my thumb tight there so it doesn't move on me. And then we're going to straighten the side, line it up, and sew down this last edge. But remember, we're going to leave an opening on this edge. Don't forget. Now, you don't want your opening right at the corner. So I'm actually going to stop right about here. And then, give yourself, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches, maybe 5, depending on, it's going to get sewn shut. So you don't have to, but you don't want a huge gaping hole, but, big enough to turn it out. Big enough that you can get your hand in there and grab everything and turn it out. Okay, now we're going to go back to the cutting table because we're going to mark where to sew for our mitered corners. All right, so I'm just going to be honest and tell you, this is where my brain gets confused every single time. But this is what you do. You take 2 edges and you fold them upon themselves. So you have kind of like a little triangle going here. And then you mark a 90-degree angle from the folded side of the fabric down to your stitching line. So this should be flat on this fold, and you just wiggle it over until you're right at that stitching line, and this is straight and that's on the stitching line, and that's where you're going to sew. Now you can mark it like I just did. I also like to stick a couple pins in it just in case something moves on me. And then we're going to go to the next corner and do the same thing. And obviously we have 4 corners to do. So again, you're going to take the smaller fabric, you're going to line up those edges straight, give it a little shake to get them all straight and happy. And then it's a 90-degree line down to your sewing line from the folded edge. So again, we're just going to mark this, and I'm going to pin it as well. The marking tells me exactly where to sew. The pins keep that in place. Alrighty, and then we have one more corner left. And again, just kind of putting my finger in there, getting those little guys lined up and flat. And marking this final edge. 90 degrees from the folded edge down to the sewing, to the seam, or the end of the stitching line. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, now, if you're like me and you don't trust things, you can take this at this point and kind of very carefully move this apart and see, is that going to be a miter like I want it to be? And it is. See how that comes out and it's flat? If we would have marked that the other way, it would have looked really wonky. In fact, let's see, since I have this marked on everything, sometimes what I do, which is wrong, is I go 90 degrees from this edge out like this. Now, if we did that, let's just pin this in place. I'm not going to mark it because I don't want to confuse myself. If we did that, when we go to try to turn our blanket, that corner is not going to work right? It's going to be wrong. So that is one way that you can make sure that you have it pinned correctly and marked correctly, is just take this corner and kind of very gently pull it out. You can see, is that going to lay the way it should? And it does. So that's where we're going to stitch, and then we're going to trim this little triangle off out here, and then we're going to flip it out, put a couple top stitches on it, and we'll have a nice self-binding mitered corner blanket. All right, so now I'm back at the sewing machine, and I am just going to pull this out. I'm going to pull the top fabric out because I'm stitching on the back fabric. That's the one we pieced together. And I'm just going to start right there at that stitching line, and I'm going to sew directly where I marked. And I'm going to do that for all 4 corners of the blanket. I do like to kind of pull that other layer, the top layer, out a little bit just to make sure I don't accidentally stitch on top of it and catch it in that corner. So that is one little trick for you. Once we get this last corner sewn, we'll be able to trim off our little corners and then turn our blanket and finish it up. And again, if you ever question it before you cut, just take it and give it a nice little tug and see, is that going to look right? Is that going to be a mitered corner? And it is. So we are safe to cut off this excess fabric. Now remember, we left that one pin in there just so we knew which side we were going to be turning. So let's find our pin back. Now, if you wanted to, you could give this a nice little press. And I think actually I'm going to press this out and I'll take you with me. You can see how it's done. Okay, so all I want to do is I just want to kind of press these seams from I just want to press the seams for the top fabric, just so they kind of lay a little flatter. You can definitely press out the corners too if you want. This step is not really totally necessary, but it will give your finished blanket a little flatter of a look when you go to turn it. So it's worth it. It doesn't take but a few minutes. And yes, you can make these blankets any size you want. Basically, the 5-inch difference will give you a 2.5-inch binding or a border around the top fabric. So if you wanted a smaller one, then you would just cut a smaller backing fabric. So let's say you didn't want a 2.5-inch binded, or you didn't want a 2.5-inch border around the top. Maybe you only wanted 2, so then you would cut it at 4 instead of 5. And that's just kind of how it works. All right, so let's find our side that is not sewn again. Here it is. And then we're just going to, all right, so once you find your side that isn't sewn all the way shut, you're just gonna reach in and pull everything out. I'm sure you guys have done this a million times, right? We turn things out. This is not rocket science here. But if you haven't done anything like this before, it could be a little tricky, I guess. I think I left about 4, maybe 5 inches. And to be quite honest, I probably should have left a little bit more. But it will get it turned. It's all right. Okay. Now everything's turned out, and I'm just going to take my hand up to the corners and just kind of give that a little poke. And those are those mitered corners that we've made and checked. Last one. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it back to the ironing board and give it a little light press around the edges. And I'm just going to kind of lay it on here, give it a little pop to pop on the sides. And we can do a couple different things at this point. I am probably going to do a double type of a top stitch on it, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Don't forget we do have that hole that we're going to want to do something with too. Now you can definitely hand stitch that shut. That is an acceptable solution. I'm not a hand stitcher, so I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. Alrighty, let's change the presser foot. That is an important first step. Like I said, I broke one needle today already. I don't really exactly want to break another. Okay, I am going to use a zigzag stitch. And I'm going to go right here all the way around. So we're going to start in the corner here. Now remember that we have one side that's still open. And when we get to that point, we'll go a little slower and bring it together. Here's where our piece backing shows. When we press it, it just kind of gives it a little bit of structure, so those two layers kind of stick together. It's a good thing about flannel. Now we're at the corner, we'll just swing it around. This is such a nice, soft little blanket. Oh my goodness. The funny thing is, I don't really even know where this blanket is going. I don't, I'm trying to think. I don't have anyone in my life right now that has a little girl. Little enough for a blanket like this, you know. No babies. Oh, here is the hole that I was talking about. So I'm laying the bottom fabric, or the top actually, the top fabric flat, and then I'm turning in the top, that green, and I'm just gonna stitch right across it. So I don't have to hand stitch that closed or anything. I'm just going to kind of tuck that seam allowance in and zigzag right on across. All right, so let me get this zigzag done and then I'll tell you what else I'm gonna do. All right, so the other thing that I want to do, just because I don't want this little border out here, you know, kind of bunching up and stuff, I'm going to run just a little straight stitch around the entire outside perimeter of the blanket as well. Now, is that absolutely necessary? No. All right, so here we have it. We have a cute little self-binding mitered corner baby blanket. Now I used a 28-inch top, a 38-inch back, and it measures at 32 inches finished. Now remember that my backing is actually spliced together because I didn't have any flannel that I could use that was big enough to get to that 38 inches, so I just sewed it together. Then I pressed those seams flat, did a great big zigzag to make sure those seams stay really good and flat. And you can't, I mean, it is definitely flat there. So that's awesome. And then we cut and pinned our 4 sides, so to 1/4 of an inch at each corner, marked our mitered corners. Make sure you double check that before you cut, because I'm just saying, I haven't before and I regretted it. And then we sewed it all up, turned it out, pressed it, did a little zigzag top stitch right there where the top and the back meet, and then a nice little straight stitch around the edge for a top stitch look. And this is ready to a gift. Now, do I know who I'm gifting it to? Nope, but it's great because I can fold it up, put it on the shelf, and next time I need a little baby blanket for someone, I have one ready. So you can make these any size you want. It does not have to be a square even. You can make these bigger or smaller. Maybe you have grand kiddos or little kiddos that want some blankets for their baby dolls or their Barbie dolls. You can definitely make these super small. You could put them on the floor for pets to cuddle up in. They're really a nice weight. It's really soft and it's really, like, you know, flexible, and it will drape really well over you, keep you warm. So you can make these huge for the couch or small for those little doll beds, whatever you want. But don't forget that, like I showed you today, if you don't have one piece that's big enough, maybe you have more than one piece to make it big enough. Splice it together, do some patchwork. And for that matter, you could totally do a patchwork top. Just start with like something easy, as 5-inch squares or something, and get that top into a little patchwork format or something instead. There's a lot of different ways to customize these little blankets, but there really are quick and easy projects, and it probably took me less than an hour to get this together, and that's even with the extra step of slicing that background and cutting them all and doing some extra seams. So I hope that this inspires you to use up some of those flannel scraps that we have laying around and turn it into something cute. I hope you're looking forward to the other projects I'll be sharing in Cozy Up October, and I hope until next time you find joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.